supply chains survive the 2021 holiday season? Brian Higgins is principal in supply chain and operations leader with KPMG. Hello, Brian.
Hi, Bob.
Thanks for being with me. I really appreciate it. So I'd like you to give me, to the extent you're able to, not that far after the conclusion of the just concluded holiday season, a brief postmortem on how retail supply chains fared during the peak holiday season.
Yeah, hey, happy to talk about it. And it's your point, we're sort of on the heels of it. I think, all of the sort of, I would say, Bob, the early indicators are in, right? And I'll talk about it probably in a couple of different dimensions. I guess, first of all, like for the companies that we service, so for our client base, generally, I think it was regarded as a pretty successful holiday season, right? This was like no other I've experienced in the history of my career in terms of the expectations and the hype around it and the concern around it. So I think it was fairly obvious on one level, it was a really early holiday buying season, right? So companies prepared from a supply chain standpoint well in advance, right?
Yeah.
And I think that work paid off on one level, right? And the biggest measure of success for a lot of the clients that we interact with is just the increase in retail sales. And in the last couple of weeks on an aggregate basis, you've seen them as well as I, and whether it's in that 8 to 10% increase in overall retail sales for year over year from a holiday season, that's sort of the general accepted kind of metric at sort of the aggregate level, right? And then we can certainly peel that back a little bit, but I guess I'd start by saying, all in all, on an aggregate basis, I think it's generally regarded as a pretty successful holiday season.
Well, that's interesting because we had some dire predictions about how, first of all, maybe one of the reasons why shoppers shopped early is because we kept telling them to. Everyone said, shop early, it's going to be a disaster. You're not going to get your packages in time. So it seemed like a lot of shoppers went ahead and did that. But we don't hear about a lot of disastrous cases of packages being held up, not being delivered for days and days, didn't make it for the holiday season. So better than we thought, right?
I think so. And again, from a more anecdotal standpoint, I've got the benefit of participating in a chief supply chain executive forum that we sponsor, and that's really good information, right? So that I can pick up on some of the more anecdotal evidence. And I think anecdotally, I've certainly heard from a number of our clients that I guess from a retail standpoint, people came in stores and they leveraged some of the things that our client executives were hoping that they were leveraged. So the buy online and pick up in store, great. That we did see some uptick in. The curbside kind of pick up. Yes, we saw some uptick in. There was an anticipation that people would be coming in stores, and I think that did at a high level that played out, right? And again, despite all the latest virus concerns and issues that were prevailing. And then I think from the other dimension, from the non-retailers, from the providers, the UPSs, the FedEx, the USPS kind of thing, that fell into the category of, I think they anticipated the crunch and navigated fairly well. So again, this is sort of all in the spirit of relatively good news, right? And I do have a perspective on, hey, coming out of this, what we can expect. But I think your first question around how some of the components and stresses and strains for an overall supply chain fared, I think, again, in aggregate, relatively well.
I wonder if it's because we learned some of the lessons of the previous holiday season. I mean, UPS and FedEx both put caps on the amount of stuff that they would take from large shippers, and maybe that helped to keep them from melting down, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think you're right. I mean, you think about it, this is what, almost the third kind of season where we're experiencing some of this crazy variability, right, which influences all the noise and things. So.
Yeah, I guess the one big wild card that everybody was afraid of was the impact of what's been described as a widespread labor shortage. That you wouldn't get enough people to staff the stores, to staff the warehouses, and to drive the trucks. But it appears that, well, maybe we did have enough, just enough to get by. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, I think there was sort of in pockets just enough to get by. I can tell you, though, one of the things I'm really interested in, and we're having more conversations now that the dust has settled a little bit from this hyped up holiday season, is it's clear to me, Bob, there was a lot of patchwork done to move products through the supply chain, to
Mhm.
unclog the cholesterol, so to speak, right? But there's still a lot of structural supply chain issues at play that haven't really yet been addressed. That is going to come to roost because there was a lot of heroics and a lot of unnatural acts, things that I would describe as unnatural acts
Yeah.
to I guess to enjoy this
Hmm.
relatively successful or flat out successful holiday season. So and what I'm talking about there in terms of unnatural acts, I can't tell you how many supply chain executives that I've spoken to that give me, information saying, "Hey, Brian, right, we're doing things in this holiday prep season that just make me terribly uncomfortable. We're prepaying for Asia-based suppliers.
Hmm.
Containers arrive with a ton of quality issues, but you know what? We got to do it, right, to get our fair share in this allocation mode. Air freight all-time high. That's eroding profit. The unloading trailers, it took me 37 hours prior to this. It's ballooned to 57 hours. So
Hmm.
everything is more difficult, costing more, and just in a challenge to navigate. And I think in general, supply chains prepped for this. I think they navigated fairly well, but I do think it's going to come back to roost, Bob. I think now that we're
Yeah.
through the holiday season, a
Yeah.
lot of these structural issues, are going to be needing to be addressed.
Well, what you're just describing sounds more like firefighting or even triage than it does what you would normally do on a daily basis with the supply chain, even during a peak season. So, going forward, then, tell me about how we can emerge from this and get back to some semblance of normality. I know that let's talk about the new normal or whatever, but how can they go forward and continue these successful supply chains without resorting to these unnatural acts that you just described?
Yeah, I think the first thing that I guess we all need to get comfortable with is that the environment that we were participating in prior to the holiday is still going to persist in terms of this
Right.
unprecedented supply and demand variability. And
Mhm.
really, that's what's driving all this madness. So if you look at the supply side, there is so much variability in the port congestions and the import volumes and the labor availability and some of the labor costs that you've already addressed. But it spills beyond that, right? It's all the manufacturing input costs are also hugely variable, the raw material scarcity, right? And then on the demand side, there's an equal number of drivers, right, that are also continue to be variable, the least of which is the new COVID cases, right?
Yeah.
Now they're influencing the supply chain in a different manner, but that's a factor on the demand side, the consumer sentiment, the wage growth, the real disposable income, all of these things you put it into a pot and you stir it up, and it's the same factors that were producing this variability prior to the holidays are for the most part still persisting. I think we're going to see
Mhm.
some stability, but I don't think it's going to be okay, all of a sudden we're in a position where it's a whole different, stable environment.
Right.
So if we sort of wrestle with that or come to terms with that, that's where I'm seeing now, okay, well, now I think we've got to address some of the more structural issues that I described. And I think that a lot of the folks that we work with are now moving a little bit to say, I survived the holiday.
Mhm.
Now I've got to get to some of the structural issues, and that's where a lot of the hard work kind of is, and instead of that patchwork or that sort
Yeah.
of quick fix kind of thing.
But I'm just wondering how it affects the future of supply chain partner networks. Where the partners will be, where the manufacturers will be, how companies will deal with their logistics providers going forward. There's got to be some permanent changes that are in the cards for these supply chains, is there not? And I wonder what form they might take.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, and I think there's two, I guess, high level schools of thought that I'm seeing our clients sort of wrestle with. There is a set of circumstances where executives are saying, "Hey, all this nuttiness and all this variability has convinced me that I don't have enough visibility. I don't know
Yeah.
if I have enough planning capabilities to understand what's coming my way." And we've seen that in the form of, advanced planning systems, digital transformation around that, people trying to increase skills to get a better understanding of their forecast and what's coming. Very, very
Mhm.
difficult, but that's certainly a school of thought. The other one is saying, hey, you know what? I don't know if I'm ever going to get comfortable on getting a better understanding of predicting what's coming my way because
Right.
of all these dimensions. And that sort of categorization are the folks that are working on some of the more foundational changes that you described, saying, hey, I have got to get myself smarter and better to buffer some of this variability. I need the shock absorbers in my system because I
Right.
know the shock's still going to come. And those are the companies that are saying, hey, I'm going to reevaluate my supply base. I'm going to reevaluate my overall network. I'm going to
Mhm.
look at the purpose and mission of every plant that I have and make sure that that's suitable for my new supply chain world.
Yeah.
Apologize, I'm not sure what that was,
No
but
problem. Not a
it's the
problem.
work from home, right?
Yeah, yeah, that comes with the territory. Okay, so if to some extent these shippers and companies can catch their breath and make these long-term plans and change from what you described as unnatural acts to natural acts, let's hope that that will have some impact on supply chains going forward. But
Yeah,
Brian Higgins, great speaking with you today, KPMG. Thank you very much for your insights. Really appreciate it.
yeah, I appreciate it. Thank you, Bob.
Thanks.